Hello, everybody, and welcome to the newest episode of Circuit 42. I am your host, Ian, and I am here with Magic Collected Edition Wizard, Omar, aka Near Mint Condition, aka the Uncanny Omar.
Hey, I don't know about wizard, but I'll take connoisseur, guy that
There
buys
you
way
go.
too much. Yeah, maybe something like that. Is there a word for that?
The man of many nerdy
Order?
hats.
Order? There we go.
There we
That's a
go.
good word.
And of course, Cosplay Ninja and Badass of all five, and Wizard of Alls, Master of most of them, Ødfel.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Is cosplay ninja like a real title? Because that's pretty cool.
Should be.
I don't know. I think it would be a really cool competition, like who gets to be crowned cosplay ninja. It would be pretty sick.
But do you get like
Oh, okay,
smoke
yeah, I like
pellets, you can
that.
teleport?
Yeah.
I think unless you have to be able to win smoke bombs as part of at least a consolation prize.
Dude, people who can actually work in smoke packs and stuff into their armor is so cool. I've always wanted to do that.
I feel like if I ever got back into cosplay, because I was under briefly, if I tried, knowing my luck, I would just set off a fire alarm at the convention hall. It would just go horribly wrong.
Make props too close to the sun.
Yeah, it would be worse than the what was the anime convention that turned out to just be a ball pit.
Oh my God, yeah. What is that? DashCon?
Yep. Omar, you know about DashCon, right?
No, no, I
There-
do not.
Oh. Yeah, it was like a Tumblr convention
Mm-hmm. I know what that
and
is.
yeah, the con runner, something happened and either they embezzled the money or they didn't get as much money or something. So the con ended up being like an empty convention center with pretty much like a small ball pit in it, and that was it. One of my friends actually has a photo in the ball pit because they actually went.
Uh, like a pit?
yeah,
Like a small kitty inflatable pool full of balls, and that was like pretty much it. It was infamous there for a while. It was like back in God, like 2009, 2010.
back in the olden times,
Hmm.
Oh
no
my
one was
goodness.
alive then.
No, I have never heard about this. So that's I'm sure there's a lot of scary con stories or cosplay con stories out
I
there.
feel as far as
Oh yeah.
Scary Con compared to other convention moments, it's probably the lesser of scary moments. It's like, well, this is just vaguely disappointing.
Well, yeah, I'm sure.
So with that, I brought you guys here because I've had you both on the show before, both individually and together on the show, and I
Mhm.
realized it's been a long time because I started using Zoom after a certain point to record, and I had reached out to when I checked the emails to send the email invite to you, it fell. Yours popped up. Omar, yours hasn't, which
Mhm.
means this was pre-Zoom, pre-Spotify that we last had you on the not pre-Spotify, but pre-Zoom. So we last had you on the show. So that'd be about what? I think the last time we had you on was about a year.
Probably, yeah. I think because the last time I was on was the one we did with Tinkering Pixie as well.
Yeah, we did that one, then we did the
Um,
one with Buddy.
oh, right. Yeah. So maybe like a year or so plus. It's
Yeah,
been a hot
which means it's
second.
been over a year since we've had you on, Omar. So this
Yeah.
is something that we definitely needed to have happen. I'm actually very excited because it's going to be our first video show on our YouTube channel and our first upload on the YouTube channal in 5 years. So this is
It's
like,
gonna
Five
be
years.
exciting.
yeah,
What
because
happened? Oh, you went
we,
podcast, right?
yeah, well, initially we did the video, we used YouTube as our podcast source, and then we switched over to audio entirely and started using YouTube for conventions. And then COVID happened. And then
Yeah.
also it became much more difficult to do one-on-one interviews with guests at conventions. So that just got shot to hell. And so the YouTube channel, weirdly enough, started getting subscribers. Not a lot. It's like a
Hmm.
very slight bump. But I went back and I'm looking at videos. I'm like, wait, 3,500 when there's like 5 people listening to such and such show. Okay, so we got to start moving things back over to the YouTube channel. That was my immediate thought. And I'm like, this feels like an appropriate show, especially with what both you guys have been doing with Near Mint Condition. I'm like, you know what?
Yeah,
This
yeah.
feels like the return to YouTube. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah. But what I've been wanting to what I want to do, I felt like this would be really appropriate would be to do our first comic, like the comic that we read that got us into comic books. And depending on the age that you started reading comics, we didn't like I was probably just a stupid kid, so I just didn't know that these comics continued from one issue to another. I'm like, what the hell is this number at the corner box? And so I would have random comics as a kid, and then at a certain point, I'm like, wait, these comic books continue. And I would start buying monthly comics for a particular series. So I'm thinking we talk about our first one or two comics that got us to read comics in the first place. And then the ones where we had that spark where it's like, wait, comics have one issue that leads to another. And I wanted to kind of give an idea of everybody and see what your first comic was and what the one that really just got you into it as a whole.
Yeah, I'd be down for that.
Who would like to start?
Ladies first.
Oh, mine's gonna be so boring though, but I can definitely start.
Every orchard is boring, right? Let's spice it up some. What do you got?
So I started reading comics in high school, so I feel like it's not going to be as magical of a story as either of you who started reading books as a kid. It's kind of what I meant by like it's not going to be as riveting. But my first was I think it's technically New 52. Let me check.
Okay. So we're talking 2011. So thank you, Ødfel, for making me feel really old because you were in school.
No problem.
It's what you do.
Yeah, the New 52 Birds of Prey was my first comic I ever picked up. So I went back and I was going through some back issues because it had been out for a while. And found like the number one and started reading it. So I knew they were in series and I wanted to start somewhere. So that was the one I picked. And I loved it. So I ended up going back and I read like the Gail Simone run and a whole bunch of other runs. But yeah, that was my first book. But I feel like I got a late start on comics, so it doesn't have quite as much childlike wonder to it as some other people might.
I have a question then. If you've started reading Birds of Prey, then did you know, because you were a little bit older than Ian and I were, did you know ahead of time that like the story would continue? Like, oh, this is a Birds of Prey issue number 3. I guess there's a 1 and 2, and I now need to go and buy an issue number 4. Or was it like trade paperbacks available? Because we are talking about like 2011, and that era was full of trades and graphic novels.
Yeah, so I remember I got a couple. I had to dig for it because I think like Birds of Prey they were already pretty far into New 52 when I started reading comics. So I had to go through back issues to find a number one because I was like, well, if this is the beginning of a run, like I want to read number one. So I knew they continued. I knew they and I think I bought like the first 2 issues and I liked it. So I ended up just switching to trades from there. And then I have trades for the rest of the run. So
awesome. So the New 52 run. Okay.
Yeah. I entered in the era with New 52 and Bendis X-Men, so I've got a lot of weird perceptions of comics. I feel like since that was
where all
when I
this
started.
madness comes from. Okay.
Yeah.
What about you, Ian? Where did you start?
Well, I had 2 that I got approximately the same time. I was 4 years old, so I was slightly younger. First one was an issue of Captain America. It was Captain America 343. And this was from a run. This is from one of your favorite runs, and that's the Mark Grunwald Captain America. And this is the first part of the 2-parter where Captain America fights Ronald Reagan when he turns into a snake monster, which you clearly, as YouTube has said, there's no politics in comic books, right? Yeah, it's never been political before the 2000s.
No, not even once.
I mean, what kind of commentary is Grunwald really making? You know, he's probably just talking about comic books. But
fighting Reaganomics. I forgot about that issue.
And
it was a 2-parter, huh?
Yeah, I had the first part, and I never knew about the second part until like later on as an adult. And I bought that, and I'm like, this is amazing because the first part's kind of dark, and creepy, and you have that scene at the White House where you don't actually see him, you see the glass drop, and I'm like, this is kind of spooky. And then you have the second part where it's like, I am Snake Man Ronald Reagan, and it's like, well, all that spookiness was shot straight to hell. But I'm like, this isn't, and I thought it was awesome because I'm like, because I remember they were hunting down this mutant who was shooting spikes out of his hands, and I'm like, okay, everyone talks about Spike being based off of Marrow, but I'm like, there's literally a dude who shoots bone spikes out of his arms.
Yeah.
who's a mutant, and he's African American. I'm like, no, this is somebody read this at X-Men Evolution and just didn't want to say anything because they kept talking about Marrow, and I'm like, no, that's Spike right there. But yeah, that one, and then there was an issue that I got at the same time, and that was the issue of Gru. I don't remember the exact issue number, but it was. I just remember they go to an island. It's a ship, or it's a ship and island. Like it's literally just a solitary ship that doesn't move at all. And the ship starts to sink. So Gru goes in and he brings up all this wood, and they're like, "Why did you bring all this? Where did you find all this wood?" Oh yeah, I got it from the bottom of the boat. And he brings up all the way from the boat and sinks it. So now it's permanently an island. It doesn't move anymore. And it basically just ends with Gru just wrecking all their shit, which is basically every Gru comic book ever. And
Yep.
I was four, so I'm like, okay, cool. I have these comics. And then, did you guys remember, or you might remember this? Do you remember when they did the Zorro series in the early '90s? It was on Family Channel. It had the vampire from Monster Squad in it.
Vampire from Monster Squad. You
Yeah, the same actor who played the vampire in Monster Squad played Zorro. And
no, I used to watch like the original Zorro series, so I haven't seen that one.
this was about in the early '90s. It was on the Family Channel.
Hmm. Nope, not
It was on
familiar
the,
with that one.
Yeah, I
was
don't
on
know
the
if I've
Family.
seen it.
Yeah, it was fun. And Marvel did the comic adaptation of it, and I think not Mike Mayhew, but somebody else did a couple of covers for it really early on. And and I was a military kid, so we would literally just pick them up from the PX, and that's how I pick up issues. But the first like mainstream comic that I started reading, where I'm like, oh, this is an ongoing series, I'm gonna start going to the comics from buying it, was Wolverine, and it was
Hmm.
issue number 69 where they went to the Savage Land with Larry Hama and Dwayne Turner,
Hmm.
and they had the 3-part story with that, and I started reading into that into Fatal Attractions, and I'm like, oh shit, things turned around real fast because I didn't have X-Men 25, and I'm like, what the fuck happened? Because apparently he's got bone claws now. Okay. And it was that and Robin number 18 by Chuck Dixon, which was like a one-off issue, so it's like the perfect way to get started. But even
Hmm.
though I had the Zorro comics as a kid, I would just get random issues. But the two series
Mm.
I started reading like full on picking up every month would have been Wolverine and Robin back in the 90s.
So Wolverine and Robin were your two monthly series that you would keep buying.
Yep.
That's cool. I like that.
Solid
Uh,
picks, solid picks.
yeah, I
And what
think.
about you, Omar? Oh, sorry.
No, I was just thinking. That Wolverine issue. Those are some of my wife's favorites, like with Sauron and Jubilee and the
They're
Sentinel. Those,
fun.
uh,
Yes.
yeah, she loves those issues. Because those were some that she got when she was a little bit younger. She's a couple years, 4 years younger than I am. I started really young, but I also started in Peru. That's where I started reading comics when I had an operation and I was in the hospital for a couple weeks. Because it was the free children's clinic. So yay, universal healthcare, but also free children's clinic in Peru. And my uncle sent a care package, and some of those things that were in there besides chocolate and candy uh, were comics. Now I had read comics in Peru, but I was also 4 years old, and when you're reading as a 4-year-old, you're very limited to what you read. Four and five. um, mainly about following the pictures. But we had this comic down there called Condorito, which is about a little anthropomorphic, like condor, and
Aw.
and yeah, it was really interesting how I went from that to these comics. But the one that stood out of the box was Uncanny X-Men 168. That there was a Spider-Man in there, like a Superman comic, eh, like a reprint of like old Captain America stuff. I don't even know. I'm the only one I kept was the X-Men book. I like the pictures. I like the character designs, and it was in English, so I couldn't read it. So I had to like try to figure out. But because comics are a medium that you can see and read, it's really cool how you can kind of put the story arcs together. And he would send me from time to time packages, and then down there I would pick up comics, and I was so confused because, sometimes the team looked the way they did in the comic that he sent me. Sometimes the team, well, I didn't notice there were reprints, right, of old X-Men and then old like Uncanny X-Men. And because of the way that they're translated and packaged together, I thought the X-Men and the Avengers were the same team, and I was like,
Mm.
and I didn't, and also like, since I didn't speak English, I'm like, oh, well, they must have gone through some kind of change, and that's why they're this way. But the ones that were translated had the Avengers, Vengadores, I think is what it was called, and the X-Men, Patrulla X, in like one comic anthology, and there was something else with it too. Because like Marvel and DC outsources these things, or maybe they just didn't care and they started printing, and some publisher picked it up. But it wasn't until I moved to America that I started getting them and started following the stories. But I think for me, it was like X-Men, like around the Mutant Massacres when I started following the story arcs. So that particular event means a lot to me. It was 80, what was that, 87 when that was coming out? Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. I remember one of our, because I'm very much a military brat, and one of the things I
Was
want to
your
mention.
dad in the military?
Yeah, my dad was in the military for like
Okay.
29 years. My mom was in the military briefly,
Wow.
and but she retired when she had me. And then my grandfathers were in the military.
Hmm.
But one of the big things was, and it's I've been watching some of the cartoonists kayfabe when they had the comics that were sent to military bases, because
Yeah.
you'll have the big old ads with like selling rings and shit that are just stapled in there on magazine paper. And it's so weird because it fits there. But apparently I didn't know this until growing up, that they literally would take these and they'd staple them and put them inside the comic books. And then and those would only be for military bases. And at the PX, because there were no comic stores internationally, all the comics were sold on the military base. So you would have Alien comics, and you would have Spawn, and you would have all like the Marvel and DC, and you would have like random issues of Madman. And
Hmm.
these were just in the base exchanges, which for those who don't know are kind of like a catch-all department store where you can get like clothing, books, electronics, all that. And so I just assumed this is what stores in America were like. This was all stores were like, because I'm like, oh, cool, I can just buy graphic novels of Lobo and buy Alien comics and Spawn along with Marvel and DC just at a general store. And then I didn't realize
Hmm.
till years later that non-comic stores aren't like that. It was only because there were no comic stores. And they're like, hey guys, do you want comics? Here you
Huh.
go. And it was an interesting, almost alternate version of the way comic distribution works for like newsstands and grocery stores and stuff like that.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So since you guys both read comics at much more of an impressionable age, do you feel like the first handful of books, those super young years, like were very formative on what you read now as adults? Or do you feel like your taste like changed a lot the more you've grown up? Like, do you find yourself still feeling nostalgic for things you read as kids, or do you feel like you're kind of like, oh, my interests have, changed?
Do I still feel
I
nostalgic?
mean, for you, yeah, for X-Men, I mean,
I don't even know if I need to answer that question.
yeah, gestures at shelves.
Uh,
My oh, sorry. No more?
no, go ahead, man. Go ahead, do your thing.
I was just gonna say my taste. I still love Gru because Gru's hilarious. Um, I feel like I was fortunate that my nostalgia kind of started with pretty good comics, because I'm like I can still enjoy Grunwald, Captain America. Gru is still amazing, and I just, the less Chuck Dixon that we talk about, the better. But outside of his work is fantastic. Um, but with
I I
Larry
don't even
Hama's
know if
always
he
awesome.
is he still writing things?
I think
Like,
he's just writing
I have
comics
no
book stuff
idea.
and then complaining on social media.
I mean, that's what you do though when you get older, right? That's what my dad was doing just a few minutes before I jumped on this thing. Called me to complain about my brother. And I'm like, hey dad, I gotta jump off. I think we all get there. We all
But
become.
yeah,
Um,
my tastes have broadened, but I still read a lot of the same stuff that I did back then.
did you because you were reading Robin, did that lead you into reading Batman and Nightwing and eventually Birds of Prey and things like that?
Weirdly enough, I didn't know about Birds of Prey till later, till I was in high
Mhm.
school, because it was the military bases didn't carry it. Actually, you know what it was? Oh, this makes so much sense because there was a comic store called well, it's called something. That's all I'm gonna say, and it was in California, but
It
it's
was
called
called
something. It
it was
was just
called
called
some
something. We're not gonna say the name of the comic store because just
okay,
just in case. But it
sure.
was that kind of comic store where it was basically the comic book guy in The Simpsons, except every employee was the comic book guy from The Simpsons, which is why I'm not going to name the store. I'm being polite for the
Okay.
purpose of the show.
Like when you
But
say like like the way they looked or the way they acted snooty about comics.
yes, mostly the second one, but yes.
Okay.
But
Okay. That's a very common trend when it comes to video game stores or
it put
comics.
me off comics entirely.
Oh,
Uh,
that's not good.
but this was also around the time of just around Heroes Reborn, so it's probably going to happen either way. But like so there was a huge gap because Birds of Prey came out after I stopped living in the military bases, and so did Nightwing. So for me, I was reading sporadic issues of Batman because I was mainly in bases up through 1997. But I started reading I would read sporadic issues of Detective Comics and Catwoman. It was
Mhm.
mostly DC, oddly enough, even though I'm more of a Marvel fan now. And but yeah, in terms of that, I stuck to those books. Like I very much stuck to those particular books. I read Spawn, so my mom actually read a copy of Spawn, and then it was got taken away for a while. Because it's like you're 10, give me those, and I'm like, you know what? Reasonably, that's probably a great idea in retrospect. But also because I tried to show them to the other kids, and my mom was like, "No, why are you showing this to other kids?" And she put them on the fridge. And when you're really tiny, when you're growing up, you can't really get to the comics on the fridge. It's the worst part about it. But yeah, I know I went from tiny, so small I couldn't reach over the fridge to being 6'2". I don't understand it either. But yeah, but yeah, my taste oddly enough didn't change much. I realized that Spawn wasn't very good, so there was a point where I stopped reading it.
Your mom's
Uh,
doing you a favor and you didn't even know.
I know because this was past the first 15 issues, and I'm like, okay, cool. This one McFarlane just kind of gave up. Um, but yeah, it's bad. And I was tempted when I saw your video on the Spawn hardcovers. Then I'm like, that's not worth the money, and then I just went back to something else.
Yep, I've always been a fan of his artwork. You ever there was a show, oh, what was it called? Sci-Fi Buzz. You ever watch Sci-Fi?
Mm.
I think you might be a little too young for Sci-Fi Buzz. I don't know. It was on the Sci-Fi Channel when they first launched. It was just kind of what we do on YouTube and on the internet now, showcasing all these things that are coming out, movies and comic books. But Harlan Ellison had the HBO series, right? Harlan Ellison had a spot every week on
Ooh,
this show. And it was really cool because he's also an angry old man. He's always been, or was, he passed away now. And he's one of my favorite authors.
same.
But in one of the segments, he was going on about comic books and he was like, there's this new company called Image Comics. And
Oh my
it's
God.
the absolute worst. And he was like, the guy that I cannot remember the name of the guy, but he's writing and drawing this comic book called Spawn, and he's getting really animatic about it, like animated about it. And he's like, and he takes these comic book pages. So I guess McFarlane had these pages out at a table or something, and he's like shuffling them around. He takes the pages and he shuffles them around, and he's talking to the audience, and he's like, "Look, it still makes sense." And he shuffles them again. See? And he's like, and that's the problem with comic books these days. It's all about the art, which there was a lot of truth behind that statement that Harlan Ellison was making because it was about the art in the early 90s.
Yeah,
And I mean, it's why a lot of people followed Image. But Spawn has a huge fan following.
sure does.
Uh, but it's got pretty artwork. That's what I can say. It's got pretty artwork. I
You
like
know what?
Angel Medina, Dwayne Turner, all those guys that went on after McFarlane and Capullo took off.
I've got the Udon hardcovers just like you do, and I understand the want of high quality art over storytelling that's just kind of there. So
Hey, two dudes getting into a street fight. That's all I need. I don't need plot. Give me that art. That's why it's
So
the beauty of comics. Doesn't always have to be a great story. Sometimes you just want to get lost in the art.
now,
No,
question.
that's so real.
Now, I want to throw that same question back at you, Ødfel, because being that it's 2011 and looking at what you read now, even though it was even though it was a less impressionable age, in terms of that nostalgia, did the same thing happen to you?
Yes and no. So I had a really hard time getting into X-Men at first because I came into an era where they weren't being valued in writing. Because by the time I started reading comics, it was near the end of the Bendis era, and I loved the Bendis era, but what came after it was the Inhuman heavy era of Marvel, where they were just killing off all of the X-Men all the time in favor of the Inhumans. So I kind of fell off reading X-Men after that and focused on DC. But the issue with that was DC doesn't really value the titles of the characters I liked. So I kind of just kept going back and forth based on the eras of when the books were there. And I'd say like the last, God, it probably has been 10 years now. The last like 10 years, I've been leaning more towards Marvel and X-Men since things have backed kind of bounced back towards being favorable to a lot of the characters I liked. But it's not that I don't like DC anymore, it's that they just don't write titles with the characters I enjoy, which is one of my biggest frustrations because they've got such a wealth of characters that I feel like they really only focus on giving titles to like 3 or 4 at a time and like 7 to Batman. But I probably would still be reading a lot of them if they were appearing places.
Yeah, I totally get that. My thing is right now with DC is that the edit, like, I know people always talk about editorial, people always, but the majority of people on Reddit and such will always complain about the actual creators. When there was an interview I was reading and it was with Leah Williams, who's a freaking amazing writer, as one of my best favorite comic writers right now. I'm still mad about X Factor. I think that the cancellation of X
Oh,
Factor was the
it
beginning
was
of the
so good.
downfall of the whole Dawn of X thing.
I would agree.
Um, because Trial of Bandito just kind of sucked. I know people will probably like it, but I don't care. Um, as as Omar could say, as Omar could tell you very much about that, where it's like, yeah, you're entitled to your own opinion, but Harlan Ellison logic. So there you go. But yeah, in terms of that, I'm like, there was an interview, and apparently she had asked them for more information on Power Girl, and she said, "Oh, what's the background? What's history? So I can know more about what we're doing." And they just said, "Oh, don't worry, just write whatever you like." That's pretty much what they said.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's 100% confirmed, but that's what I've read about. And I'm like, that's not how you do things. Like, you look at like, despite the fact that, like we talked about it kind of dropping off a little bit, the whole X-Men house was very organized. And everyone was like, here's what everyone's doing. Here's the character background. We're going to assign you to the person who best fits you. And then it's like, oh, you just figure it out. It's like, isn't it your
Yeah.
job?
Well, and it's like with DC specifically, like I was saying, like there's so many good characters. Like I really like Black Canary and Green Arrow. I really like Birds of Prey. I really enjoy characters like The Question and characters like Zatanna. And I feel like in Starfire, I love Starfire, and I feel like it's so difficult for them to land books that are long term in any way. Like reading Starfire, I pretty much had to read like Red Hood and the Outlaws, and then all of a sudden she's on Justice League Odyssey, and then she's back on Teen Titans, and then she's back on Justice League Odyssey, and none of them are connected. And like a lot of the mapping for some of their characters in like the 2010s on is just super messy, super messy.
I think one of my favorite things I saw on social media was Mark Waid asking people for help as to the continuity of Robin.
Oh my God.
And I thought that was hilarious that even this guy's an encyclopedia of comic book knowledge, but even he had issues with keeping up with what's in continuity and what isn't. And that's kind of why he made World's Finest its own thing. Like it's Dick Grayson
Yeah.
Robin, but he's dressed like Tim Drake. I love it. I absolutely love it. I think it was one of my favorite reads last year. But it's so difficult to continue from that. And it's almost like a pocket universe.
Mhm.
Uh, and I love everything he's done. But so when you're a writer that has all this knowledge of continuity and the past is asking people for help because we've rebooted the universe. I mean, the Tim Drake we're reading about now is not the same Tim Drake that Ian
They
was reading about.
they did
That
him so
character is
dirty.
gone. What's that?
They've done Tim Drake so dirty. It's
Oh, yeah, that is a whole episode devoted to how wrong they've treated that character. Uh, and I don't care if he's bisexual. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm
not at
talking
all.
about completely getting rid of the character, omitting the
Oof.
fact that he was ever a Robin, and then they were like, "Well, maybe he was a Robin." No, let's just say that he was a Red Robin and he hung out with
Ugh.
her. Oh, it's so confusing. But the character that you grew up reading is not the
Mm.
character that's in the comics now, and that's something that DC does from time to time. So there's an
Mhm.
actual ending to this character that you liked. So following the adventures of a new character always feels weird to me, like at first, until I get used to it. I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool. But not everybody gets a reboot, right? Some people get a soft reboot, some people get a hard reboot. Batman doesn't get a hard reboot. Batman's like, yep, Nightfall happened, No Man's Land happened, all these things happen. Yet it only he's only been Batman for 5 years.
And all the Robins are apparently the same age.
It's yeah,
Yeah.
it gets to be confusing. Whereas Marvel, I find it easier to follow, even though the timeline doesn't make any sense. Of course, it used to be that for every what was it for every 3 year? Was it every 3 years? It was 1 year, and then they changed it to like no, now it's every 7 years. It's 1 year that passes in the comic books.
That's why I'm glad was it Cerebrocast. I've started listening to them, and I love that the host just refers to it as a sliding time scale. And I'm like, yep,
Mhm.
that totally tracks.
Yeah, I mean, if you notice something like it, in the span of like probably 3 years or so. There was a particular time at Marvel Comics when writers, it might have been editorial mandate, were just not writing dates anymore. Because before, if you look at like Days of Future Past, it's like 1981, and then the future, they actually give you some dates, right? Like, and now they don't do that. Like
The
now
characters
they
having
just say,
birthdays.
yeah, now it's like present day, sometime in the future, 10 years ago. Like they don't like or if you look at tombstones, right? Like if you look at tombstones of covers of the 80s, there's always like dates on those. Nowadays it's just kind of blurred out a little bit. The years are. I
I'm
think
sorry,
that's
when
the
you
best
started
way to
talking about
do
the
it.
dates and the constant changing, and then they just get rid of them entirely, I just thought of the anime Serial Experiments Lane, present day, present time.
Mhm.
Yeah,
My daughter and I went through that series just recently. I love it.
that's still twisted. That's still a great twisted anime right there.
Oh yeah, it's so good.
Like that and Boogie Pop Phantom are like two of my favorite anime from that era. And they were just like that perfect mix of what
Oh,
weird and what the hell.
yeah.
Mm.
I like that era too.
Yeah. I am happy that like with the whole anime thing that it's actually starting to get good again because there was a moment where I'm like I'm just done with so much and now it's like there's it's almost like the reverse. It's almost kind of like TV where TV used to be garbage for a while in the early 2000s, and then all of a sudden we started getting a glut of quality, and it seems like it's happening right now with both anime and TV shows.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I haven't watched any new anime. I watched Blue Eyed Samurai, and I don't. That's not anime, right? It just looks like, but it's so good.
I need to see it. I've heard so many good things about it.
Oh
Plus,
my
it's
god, it's freaking amazing, dude. Like if you haven't
It's
seen it,
fantastic.
it's six
yeah.
episodes. It's amazing. It's
Plus, it's
so
about the guy who made Logan and Blade Runner 2049. So I'm like, okay, I gotta watch this.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Um, but I I don't know. I think I'm trying to fight this thing that I've seen happen to a lot of people. Because I worked at a comic book store. You know, you have the old guard that would come in and ask for comics, and they would follow a particular line or a particular character. And then, as somebody that worked at the comic store, and I'm sure Oddfell can saw this,
Mhm.
you're like, "Hey, have you tried this? I know you like this, but maybe check this out." And some of them would be like, "Oh, let me check it out," but most of them were like, "No, no, I don't read any more DC comics. Superman's dead to me." I stopped reading. I remember a guy was like, "I stopped reading Spider-Man when they killed Gwen Stacy." That means he never read Craven's Last Hunt. Like all these classic stories that I consider classic, but it's also his choice, right? And
Mhm.
I don't want to be that guy. And there were so many times I've broken up with X-Men. It's not a healthy relationship. X-Men is like an abusive partner that just tears you down and then sometimes lifts you up and you're like, that's why I fell in love with you. But is it worth it? I still don't know. I
You are
still
so right for that. Oh my God. X-Men is so up and down.
right. It feels like that. It definitely feels like it's this weird relationship where you're just getting beaten down by your significant other, and they tear you down and rip your heart out, and then all's forgiven when something wonderful happens, like House and Powers of X.
I've started taking a stance where I'm kind of like with long run titles and long run characters like this. There's just a moment where you have to go, some of these I'm just not going to acknowledge as canon for myself. Like some of these I'm just going to be like, it goes from this to this, and I'm just going to ignore that because
Mhm.
sometimes there's just eras that absolutely just sour the continuity to a point where you're like, for my own sake, I'm just going to pretend like that never happened.
It's called the Draco.
There's a lot of oh my gosh, yeah, the Draco and like all these. Oh my
I'm so glad they fixed that.
she flies with angels or yeah, I it's so weird to see people actually be okay with. I know people were pissed off about the whole Mystique thing, and being a Claremont fanboy, you kind of knew what he was always trying to do
Hmm.
and just couldn't because they had to abide by the comics code. And even having same-sex couples back then was a no-no. There's no way they could have done it. I mean, look how long it
Yeah.
took for North Star, and everybody knew. But throw in the whole Mystique thing, becoming a man, forget it. Back then, no way. But I saw so many people upset online that they were like, "Oh, this ruined a really good story with what's his face,
Oh,
Zurian.
uh,
What's, what's the devil's name in Nightcrawler?
Draco.
No,
it's
no,
not Azrael, it's
Azazel or
Azazel.
that's
Azazel.
it. Yes, thank you. Like, what are we really like fighting for Chuck Austin's X-Men to be
The
canon?
transphobes are.
Dude, that was such an dumb, like, that's such a dumb argument. No, that was an awful story that never should have been done.
No, and that's the thing. I'm like, for a lot of these moves they've been doing recently, I'm like, this just feels like it's finally canon. Like them giving Rachel a girlfriend. And I'm like, yeah, Claremont had her flirting with Kitty the entire time. Well,
He was
yeah,
upset
he
about that
heavily
one.
implied. Yeah. And
He
I'm
wanted
like,
her to
well,
be with Magic. He was like, it's the blonde.
Yeah.
I want Kitty and Magic so bad. That's my shit personally. So I totally get it.
Apparently, that was
Um,
Claremont's idea. He was upset when he found out about Rachel.
like I want those two together so bad.
But now it's
Um,
Rachel and what's her name?
it's
Psylocke,
Rachel
right?
and Betsy, I think,
Or
last
not
I saw.
Psylocke. She going by Captain Britain, whatever she's going by. I
Yeah.
can't keep up.
There's
Captain.
still there's still hope for Kitty and Magic. When Magic broke up that wedding, I was like, someone writing this knows what's up. I was like, someone knows what we want. But
It
like
just
there's so
becomes
many
like, oh,
things like
sorry.
that. Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say there's so many things like that where finally they go back and they canonize things, but it's just one of those like people will always be mad. People ignore that there's been subtext.
Well, this is why when Omar, this is why when you interviewed Chris Claremont, I very specifically was like, "Hey, let's talk about this," because I do, like you,
Mhm.
I do, and I'm like, let's get him on record on here, even though he said it before, but people just forget when they're angry or bigoted,
Well,
either one.
people believe whatever they want to believe, right? If
Yeah.
nobody wants to hear things that they don't want to. I mean, and the argument can go both ways too. Like there are some wonderful things I'd like to believe that Stan Lee said, but I think sometimes people miscredit him for a lot of things, and it happens. Um, Especially like I talked a little bit about this on my Saturday stream, like the memes that go around this time of year, like Black History Month, with comparing like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, the Professor X, and Magneto, and giving Stan Lee the credit for that. And I was like, no, absolutely not. I think it's wonderful, but no, like he created like I think mutants have become a symbol recently, not recently, but for a long time, for minorities. And I'm not talking about just, where you're from, but it's your sexual preference and everything. Like, if you stand alone or if you feel alone, that's the symbol that they represent. But that wasn't Stan, right? That was all Claremont. And I feel like
Mhm.
Stan gets so much
Yeah.
credit for that because of memes. And I'm like, and I try to be not one of these actually guys, and I leave it alone because I've seen some of my friends share that don't even read comics. I'm like, oh my god, I'm not gonna be that guy. 'Cause I mean, Stan Lee just created a bunch of characters because he was just tired of coming up with origin stories. So he just like, oh, these people are born with powers. That's it.
Yeah.
There wasn't anything
And,
deep about it.
yeah, and that's the thing is like Claremont really breathed new life into it because not only like yeah, they were persecuted, but also at the end of the day, like it was five white teenagers living in a mansion. And it wasn't until Claremont that the cast was not only actually diverse, but I feel like they started diving into more allegorical issues with them being outcasted from society that really built
Mhm.
it up.
I think he, of course, he wasn't the one that came up with the concept of like Storm joining the team or Sunfire. That was all the editors at the time and Len Wein. But I think he is X-Men. Like that's what we
Mhm.
love about X-Men. What X-Men inspire human beings to be is all Chris Claremont. And of course other writers since then that have taken on the book, but the things that I love about X-Men have come from him. And I love that. There's another one that I was just talking about this Saturday was giving credit to Jack Kirby. I love Jack Kirby too. But it's that meme that goes around again in Black History Month with Jack Kirby was told by his editor that he needed to draw more white people in Black Panther comics. So he drew the KKK. That story's true, but it wasn't Jack Kirby. It was Don McGregor that did that.
Love Don
And
McGregor so much.
oh man, what a badass.
That's such a
Okay,
good clapback.
you want more white people in this comic about this guy that lives in Africa? You got it.
Have you seen on the first Black Panther Blu-ray, did you watch the old roundtable interview with had Don McGregor, it had I think Christopher Priest
Mhm.
and who's the other one?
The writers, so there's Reggie Hudlin and Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Well, Reggie Hudlin wasn't on it, but Coates was, and it was one of the best things ever. And as someone who's not a fan of Hudlin's Black Panther run at all,
Mhm.
minus the creation of Siri, I'm like, cool. I don't even there. It's okay. Um, because
I like his
without
house party movies.
yeah, but without Priest, we would not have modern Black Panther if it wasn't for Christopher Priest, in my
Oh
opinion.
no, no, yeah. The Dora Milaje, all that stuff. It was all created by priests. Like the mythos, everything that I liked about the Black Panther movie came from him.
I
With
wanted to. Oh, sorry.
no, you with what you said though, the exception of Shuri, because that was created by Reggie Hudlin.
Yeah,
Oh, and I guess
and
Ramonda, right? Because no, she showed up in Christopher Priest run because that was a little bit of a retcon.
I wanted to touch on two things because you mentioned Stan Lee, and you mentioned
Mhm.
and we were talking about
Oh,
Magneto.
and I love Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, by the way. I wasn't like
Oh,
saying they stole someone's thunder.
remember, comic book resources. Oh, this guy named Omar hates Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. It's
No,
like Phil at
not at
11.
all. Not at all. I just don't like misinformation spread.
Same, but but what I was looking at, what I was thinking about is the problem with if you go back, if anyone goes back and reads those original issues with Magneto before Claremont, it's kind of awful because when you really think about it, it's like if anyone who believes that Stanley came up with that metaphor, it's like the Stanley, if he came up with that metaphor, that's not the same Stanley that we see because it's like Cat Magneto is like the worst kind of awful in those early issues. And it's like this could be read as a criticism of radicalization against racism. And
Very
because
one dimensional.
yeah, because like the comparison between Malcolm X, like Malcolm X never was like, hey, go kill white people. Like he never said that. And then you have Magneto where it's like, see those humans? Fuck them. that evolved, but I feel like see those humans fuck them was pretty much Magneto in the pre Claremont X-Men comics.
Honestly. And I feel like a lot of it too, like they weren't dealing with a lot of like the political intrigue until way later either. Like you didn't really dive into like Senator Kelly type stuff for a while.
Oh man. I Magneto. Yeah, I mean, if not for those eye Magneto issues and the complexity of that character, I mean, he's one of the best characters at Marvel Comics. Him and Doctor Doom,
Hmm.
um, just amazing characters because of their complexity. And yeah, I mean, he was the twirling mustache type of villain, right? Like that's what was Magneto before the Claremont era.
You mentioned Robert Kelly, and I always think it's interesting that like one of my favorite little one-off X-Men issues is the one with him and Sharon Kelly, his wife, and how they deal with her death, and how she's clearly like, no, the mutants didn't do this. But the end of that one-off story, it could be read as a one-off story, and it could be read as just this, well, not read as it is very much, it very much shows people's perspectives and violence against them and how it can change them or make them worse for the better. And it's interesting reading that issue where she dies and seeing Robert Kelly just become worse for all about it, even though the X-Men themselves were not directly responsible. And it kind of, I I remember talking to someone because we were talking about the whole tolerating intolerance bullshit that people try to throw on the internet. And saying, oh, that makes you intolerant too. It's like, no, it really doesn't. But that's an interesting take on it because it's like, no, here's a violent, traumatic event that causes person damage for the worst. And it took him so long to get past his bigotry. And I think that's very interesting that Claremont was like, no, here's a traumatic event that clearly shows why this person became the way they did. It went from one level of severity to a far other level altogether. And
Yeah.
yeah, it is that complexity of Claremont storytelling that you did not have before him in X-Men, and for a long while afterwards, till maybe like Grant Morrison. And
Oh,
even Morrison didn't
absolutely.
really write a great Magneto. He just like, I'm gonna do cocaine and kill people, and I'm like, really? That's your plan? Get coked up and kill people? That's not cool, Magneto.
Uh, I feel like that there was a little bit of that missing from like the ultimate version of the character too,
Yes.
and that's why the ultimate era of comics to me were just it's been there, done that, but I'm so glad so many people are getting into it. I think Ultimate Spider-Man did it better. I think Ultimate Spider-Man was able to capture the magic of Peter Parker and Spider-Man, but yeah, Ultimate X-Men just was pretty edgy. That's what I
Yeah,
remember it
yeah.
Yeah,
for.
it was bad.
The poor Max mobs.
Oh my gosh. I forgot.
I
I
can't
forgot.
forget. That's seared into my psyche.
Yeah, that was a thing. I will say that they got better later with some of the later writers, but yeah, but Mark Miller doesn't really understand subtlety, except for Huck. Huck was really good. Good, do more like Huck, Mark Miller.
I like the Cosmonauts. That was fun.
Oh, Cosmos
Mm.
was fun. It was just bros it was just bros with time travel.
Yeah, just give me more of that. So like it, if you're having fun, you can tell he was having fun writing the comic. Like that's what I like. Um,
Also, the artwork by Sean Gordon Murphy. Sean Gordon Murphy can not do bad artwork.
yeah, no, it's a shame he's not working with anybody these days. He just wants to
Yeah.
do things on his own. And don't get me wrong, I like the whole White Knight storyline, but for me, I love
Mm.
love his artwork when he was working with other people when he did that story with Grant Morrison,
Joe the
Joe
Barbarian.
Barbarian.
I love
Yeah,
it.
so good.
But
It's so good.
yeah, this is I realize with as much content as all of us can create in like an amount of time, We've definitely got to do a follow-up show with we definitely have to do a follow-up to this because I haven't talked to y'all in a while, and this has been really, really fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you just let me know, man.
Definitely. But yeah, the so what have you all got coming up? What can you talk about?
What can we talk about? I just announced something big today. I don't know.
Yes.
Was very happy about that. It's a book that I've had um on the reprint poll for 2 years, and I was like, oh, maybe they're not gonna do it. And it was almost like a losing battle, like because they didn't do it last year, and I was like, dang, because I really like people having everything, right? And since they're stepping away from oversized hardcovers, I was like, how can I get this reprinted? So my suggestion was putting X-Men Days of Future Present with Extinction Agenda together. Um, those two oversized hardcovers, and they did so much more than just that. They added all those
So
Marvel
excited.
Comics Presents. It's so cool. Very, very excited for that one. And then I've got the reprint poll kicking that off live this Thursday on the channel at 1 p.m. With Peter, and it's gonna be pretty cool because that was Taylor. Taylor Talks Comics. His idea was to do it live. I was like, I don't know, do I want to? He was like, yeah, man, it could be like CNN. You can watch the polls live. I was like, okay, sure, let's do it.
As someone who's very outwardly political, as you guys may have figured out, and the listeners might have figured out, I'm very excited for those Marvel Comics Presents issues by Indocenti. Because it's like it's literally democratic socialism, the comic book starring Colossus, and I can't wait for those.
Oh,
I
the
wish they
God,
would
God
talk.
countries, the God
Yeah,
countries.
it's
Yeah,
good. It's
good.
underrated. What about you, Phil? What do you got going on?
Yeah, so I have Katsucon this weekend, which would be really fun. And then I've got a little bit of a break before some upcoming later spring cons. Might do C2E2, might just wait till AX. But other than that, I'm going to be working on putting out some new toy unboxing videos. I've got some really cool stuff to unbox and share, and posting cosplay stuff over on like Instagram and Facebook as well. So it's gonna be really fun. I'm looking forward to like sharing a bunch of stuff, but yeah.
She's
Nice.
also gonna be on my channel on the 22nd arguing with me. About DC Omnis that should be evergreen. Those are a lot of fun.
Hey, come
Those
on,
are
that
so much
Phoenix
fun.
Omni, that
That
Phoenix
Phoenix
Omni, man.
Omni, that's all I'm saying.
What the hell?
Still have my Phoenix trade sitting on my desk from when we did that argument.
That's I love that cover though.
Me too. I love that black dress. It does not get enough love.
The what have we got coming up? I'm gonna be doing an interview with Dan Kemp, the comic colorist who worked on who's known for mostly he's known for his Spider-Man covers for with J. Scott Campbell for the J. Michael Straczynski run. But he has also worked on Daredevil, specifically on the Kevin Smith run, and he did is prolific colorist. Sorry, slight stutter. Comic colorist on Spawn, and then from depending on what happens, we're actually going to have Steve Oliff on the show, so
Oh,
I'm actually really
nice.
excited about that. And if
Big fan of his colors.
oh, me too. I'm so
Big
excited.
fan of his stuff.
And then we're gonna have a hiatus for March, and then at
Mhm.
the end of March, we're gonna come back with an interview with the cosplayer Autumn Ivy, if you're familiar with her.
Oh, yes.
I
And
am
yes,
not, but you what does she dress as? Is that the
um,
right question to ask?
well, she
Really
just got.
buff, really hot buff women.
Oh, what's her name?
I don't. Her name is Autumn Ivy, Omar.
Autumn Ivy. Okay,
Yeah,
just I was curious for future.
Omar's like Autumn Ivy, come save
Autumn
me.
Ivy. Okay.
Yeah,
The
like
Oh,
very, yeah, like characters like I think she's done Vi from Arcane. She's done like Wonder Woman, like a bunch of like the kind of more like muscle characters. I'm a big fan. She does amazing work.
my favorite with her is one that doesn't get a lot. It doesn't get most people don't talk about, and that's her Red Hood. It's
Yes.
completely
Oh my
different than most of her
gosh.
oh,
cosplays, and it's
like from the
fucking
video game
awesome.
or from the
Or from the
comics?
comics. But it's kind of a semi-original design on it when you see it without the helmet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very cool, and it's the early Red Hood design, not like the weird Red Hood and the Outlaws hood thing where I don't understand. Um,
looking at her cami. It's good.
Yeah, yeah.
The cami's good.
But yeah,
She
I'm
does
looking
really
forward to
cool
that.
stuff. Yeah.
She was actually a host for Circuit 42 back in the day, and so we actually had her on about a year or two ago because it was when she did the cover for Red Sonja, and now
Oh,
we're
yeah, yeah,
bringing her
yeah.
back at the end of March because I realized how long it's actually been since we've done anything with regarding that. But so question as we get everything wrapped up, we're in this social media fun place where nothing toxic or awful ever happens. Where can we find you all?
Go ahead,
I can go
Oddfell.
first.
Yeah.
So I am on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, all under Oddfell. It should just be ODFEL, except on Twitter it is a 0. I also do toy and statue unboxings over on my YouTube. And yeah, I think that's all of it.
Omar, what is this
I
near mic condition you speak of?
we do have social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. It's Near Mint Con. Near Mint Con, I think, or Near Mint Condition. If you check it out, we can be found there. But I'm here every day on my channel, sitting here. As a matter of fact, I gotta go and prep something right now for a live video. But yeah, that's it. That's where you can find me. What about you, Ian? Where can people find you?
You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Ian McIntosh, because I'm not particularly creative. And you can find me on Circuit 42 on Facebook and Instagram, and not on X because we just couldn't stand the musk of it all. But you can listen to us on Spotify, Google Play, and iTunes.
Well, thank you so much for having us. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, man.
Definitely.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm gonna go and watch this Deadpool trailer now. That
Oh,
just
did they drop a trailer?
What
dropped. They just dropped it. Yep. That's what my co-host Amanda was like. Hey, do you want to do a video reaction? I'm like, to what? It's a Super Bowl. And she's like, they just dropped the Deadpool 3 trailer. And I'm like, oh, I guess I do. I had no idea that we're gonna drop it. Okay. I don't watch the Super Bowl, so I didn't know. So apparently they were gonna drop it tonight because of the Super Bowl.
I don't want to watch it right
That'll be
now.
exciting.
But I know you want you can't spoil your react. So with that, then I wanted to say thank you for once again. Thank you everybody for listening. And this is gonna be, like I said, this is gonna be the premiere of the return of the Circuit 42 YouTube channel, which you can now also find Circuit 42 back on. With that, just have a great night, everyone.
Bye,
Have a
everybody.
great night.
Bye.